Hello and welcome to an Infinity the Game Battle Report. Today we are playing the Tartary Army Corps against Vanilla Combined Army, and the scenario is Hardlock. Hardlock is one of the 5 missions at the upcoming satellite event happening in Australia in CanCon in January next year. And with the scenario pack and date announced and ticket purchased, it's time to start figuring out what army we're going to play. Tartary Army Corps is on a short list of factions I'm really interested in, although they're in some pretty good company. I'd also love to play Hak Islam, I'd love to play Vanilla Ariadne. Even post-nerf, combined are really interesting, and I frankly would quite like to play Next Wave if they weren't as much of a ball ache as they are to build lists for. But I've been playing some Tartary games recently, and doing a lot of Tartary Army Corps list building and talking to people about Tartary Army Corps as part of the run-up for the Tartary Army Corps faction focus that I did recently, and so they're first off the block in terms of, hey, how do I think these will do if I was to play them at CanCon? And so in the interest of actually giving them a real proper acid test for that kind of competition play, I wrote an opposition list for them that a friend of mine, Owen, agreed to play to really put them through the ringer and see how they can do into potentially adverse circumstances. So, Tartary list for this game first, and this is not quite a competition optimal list. There are a number of things in here that I'm pushing. This is the extreme edge, both in terms of what it cuts and what it keeps, that I would probably walk back from as I move towards CanCon lists. For example, there's a Strelok specialist with K9 Antipode in this list, which is probably slightly too expensive to actually make it into a satellite event list. It's got 2 couriers and 2 Vistrals, which aren't all necessarily needed, and it's lacking something like, for example, a Frontovic Sniper, which is a piece that I have to say I don't personally love taking, but is a classic example of what on the channel we've come to call vegetables pieces, in the sense of eat your damn vegetables, where it just fits well into a Line Kazakh list that you can build very easily with it, a Line Kazakh, and Voronin, and it gets you a linked MSV1 Mimetism Warhorse Sniper, which even if for 28 points the Frontovic is kind of just fine, you are getting plenty out of the combat group slots that you're spending and the points that you're spending, and the SWC cost is low. You should probably just put it in the list. Sometimes you just need an MSV, for example. I don't have that here, but there are a bunch of things here that I'm testing, and which are kind of pushing some of the things that I know I would want to play with if I played Tartary Army Corps. So from the top, what have we got here? Well, we're led by Colonel Voronin. I don't know if he would go in both lists if I was to play Tartary Army Corps at a satellite. I like him a lot. He ticks a lot of boxes. However, there's going to be Kestrel Colonial Force, and they're going to have EM grenades. And I feel like it's at least worth considering whether or not I want to make some concessions for that matchup. For now, though, he's really good and he's in. +1 command token is kinda but I would use all 5 this game, because Tartary Army Corps, among other things, do a lot of repairing, but he's counterintelligence and strategos, and he's reasonably cheap. We've then got 2 scout main layers. These are EM main layers. They've got Hotnex, excellent pieces, 28 points and a half as an SWC. I do think in TAC you can absolutely get away with just one of these, but you should probably always have one. We've then got 2 Streloks. One is a forward observer, good, simple specialist for 17 points, and then one is also a specialist, but it's the K9 specialist. So it's got a submachine gun and chain colt and a P-mine. It isn't a forward observer, but it does have a K9 antipode with tactical bow. Now, 9 points for the K9 is probably actually not an unfair points cost. It's got a sensor, it's got ranged weapons, it's a peripheral, so its death doesn't cost you an order. It's got just enough range firepower to at least be somewhat credible as an ARO, at least at short range, which means it can't easily be ignored. All of those things collectively are pretty good and probably worth 9 points. The downside is that once you start getting to 26 points for a Strelok K9 specialist, you're within spitting distance of something like, for example, a Scout Forward Observer, and a Scout Forward Observer is actually proper infiltration, which matters in some missions, particularly things like provisioning, which is on the CanCon mission roster, and the Scout Forward Observer has a no hot neck. Still, this is a profile that I wanted to at least test rather than discard out of hand, so it's in this list. We've then got a Tank Hunter portable autocannon. These guys have just been absolute aces for me. I'm considering a list with 2. I do know from speaking to other Ariadne players that they aren't for everyone, but I've just been getting fantastic use out of them. I really like pieces where I just need to score 1 hit and I get what I want in a face-to-face roll, and the Tank Hunter is the absolute epitome of that. The fact that it can also play something of a defensive element from time to time is just icing on the cake, particularly since in Tartary Army Corps, I can easily have some deployment zone camouflage markers that it can hide amongst. We've then got the first of 3 dynamos. Dynamos are exceptionally high value, and I wanted to test a list that is running not just a duo, but in fact an unlinked one as well, on the grounds that it would be useful. It's very easy to spend one order around, laying out a pair of mines with its mine dispenser, and it can go on a tear if it needs to. It's a little bit of extra smoke, although I don't love unlinked ballistic skill 12 smoke, but hey, it's just a high enough utility piece that I wanted to have one in the list. Frankly, there is almost an argument for having a second Dynamo Duo, but at that point, this list is already running a lot of Silhouette 4 models. And even in my madness, I'm willing to concede that there's a point at which you can't deploy all of these things. And so I've limited myself in this case to just the 3 dynamos, although this is a triple dynamo list. We've then got the first of 2 trailer park duos, or gunnery duos if you like, a Vistral Neurokinetics AP Sniper and a Katyusha Courier. There's one of these in each combat group. We can see the second one here. And exactly as I covered in the Tartary Army Corps faction focus, there's a bunch of things these things are doing. Firstly, the Vistrals are just par excellent ARO pieces. They are Sapper, snipers with neurokinetics, plus one special die from the fire team, and they are remote presence remotes, which means they can be repaired by an engineer really easily. Every game I've had with TAC that hasn't just been a blowout in terms of my ARO pieces winning the game for me has involved me at minimum repairing Vistrals multiple times, and that's very high value. Part of why actually Colonel Veronin, yes, I consider plus one command token be a very expensive ability on a lieutenant, and I would cut it if I could. Nevertheless, I have used all of my command tokens basically every game, if only because I'm re-rolling an awful lot of remote presence engineer rolls on Vistrals. The other things these duos are doing is providing baggage. I've got 3 dynamos with mine dispensers in this list, that's really useful, and they're providing spec fire. Now, spec fire is something that is very rarely, if ever, actually going to be your plan A, and it's not really the plan A in this list either. This list wants to use things like smoke and camouflage and specialists to move forward, generally do things like lay a bunch of mines, attack asymmetrically. But if it needs to, it can roll up its sleeves and push a bunch of orders through the tractor mule couriers, or if it has spare orders, it can push those through the tractor mule couriers, and they're surprisingly good at just printing value over the course of the game. Now, I know from responses to the Tartary Army Corps video that not everyone believes me when I say tractor mule couriers can be really good as spec fire pieces, but with the positive range bands on the Katyusha MRL, and ballistic skill attack -3, and just high enough native ballistic skill, they are doing enough other cool things. They are mine layers, they are baggage, they are giving duo bonuses to the Vistrals, that the spec fire is low opportunity cost, and it generally fairly consistently produces at least some value each game. Finally, in terms of rounding out the second combat group, we've got the Dynamo Duo, a paramedic and a regular Dynamo. Plenty of the missions that we'll be playing are going to need a mobile specialist, so I'm willing to pay the half an SWC premium, although in some cases I could probably trim that down. A Conductor FTO, he's 7 points. He's a deployment zone corner guard. His main job this game will be to guard my beacon, and then an Omandino, who is the cheapest engineer in the game, and an electronic. Now, overall, I would absolutely not describe this list as well-rounded. It's quite focused and it's doing a couple of specific things. It is spewing out mines. It has tons of camouflage markers. Its active turn gunfighting is mostly limited to surprise attack pieces, things like Ohotniks and portable autocannons. And it's looking to supplement those really heavily with mine dispensers to help set up attacks, and then spec fire basically to engage anything that I really don't want to fight in a direct gunfight. It is a pretty sound TAC list, it's just quite focused. You could do a more well-rounded version, but this is pushing some of the things that I wanted to push to see if I enjoy that. Some things in this list perform quite well, very little would perform poorly, but we did elect to put it through the ringer by putting it against a fairly specifically tailored combined army list. Now, this list on screen now is a mild update to an existing archetype. It's a Caronted and Anathematic list. And we've had to make some changes here, mostly to accommodate what are reasonably called nerfs to Combined Army, which it kind of deserved, in particular the change in points cost to Icadrons and the reduction in availability of R-drones. However, while we're making changes, both the Caronted and the Anathematic have gotten more powerful, like considerably more powerful, with 6-2 move and the addition of armor piercing on the Caronted. And we've got access to Puzzlers and Ranters, the Sartroids from Next Wave, which we're using in this list. So from the top, we've got a Caronted Lieutenant MSV3 with AP Heavy Machine Gun. We've got an Anathematic Hacker, Trinity Upgrade, Plasma Rifle, and Pulsar. 2 Daldarazi, 2 Imidrons, an R-Drone, an Icadron, a Liberto, and a T-Drone. Now, I had a couple of versions of this list. The T-Drone version was the one that Owen, who would be playing at this particular game, preferred, so this is the one that he's selected. I've given him the models. But very obviously, this is a combat group built very much. You can do a little bit of disposable attacking with the Libertos and the Dararazi. The Dararazi are actually a little important in this matchup because they are warbands with Warhorse, which is very good against 2 Scout EM mine layers. But much of the work here we expect to do with the Carontid and the Anathematic. And these two, despite the fact that the Anathematic is a hacking dominance piece, these are really solid against things like Tartary Army Corps. The Carontid is very good at putting down my fixed defenses, and with an MSV3, he can just pick off any exposed camouflage markers, just put bullets into them and make them go away without having to declare discover. And while obviously the Anathematic's Trinity +1 burst is going to be wasted into my list, he's a very premium Mimetism -6 plasma gunfighter, and those are all things that Ariadna doesn't really want to play against. We've got MSV1 at best. I have no MSV in my list, and plasma has always been consistently very good against Ariadna. So my expectation is that these two collectively would be quite a challenge to deal with, and much of the rest of the list is built to enable them. So we've got things like that Arazi, for example, to defang EM mines. We've got the T-drone to make use of the Anathematics hacking, and then in the second combat group, we've got a Q-drone just for some defense. This is a scenario where having the ability to project some defense feels important, and it's something I wanted to test my list against. It can be a little bit common with this style of list archetype to thin out the defense and just rely on warbands and stuff to do your defense. Having a Q-drone meant that things like impetuous activations with pieces like the Dynamo could be pinned back, and the Thunderbolt is fairly aggressively costed. 20 points is quite reasonable, and we've got a medtech behind it. Now, the medtech Obsidon is the Cyberplug version, and he's got both a Puzzler and a Ranter. The Ranter is another Mimetism -6 gunfighting piece. I would love to have been able to afford the 19-point version, but the Thunderbolt would actually be quite solid in this game, and the Submachine Gun in Combat Group 2 with relatively few orders, if it needs to, can be used just to move and go into suppressive fire. The Puzzler is both an ARO piece and, in this instance, some really ghetto network projection. We don't have Bit and Kiss. To afford her, we need to do something like cut the Q-drone, which would mean quite aggressively thinning out the defenses. She wouldn't have terribly many orders in any case. What we're doing instead is relying on just one quite reliable surge from hidden deployment and infiltration forward 8 inches to place the deployable repeater. In a list that wasn't Ariadna, right, where you actually had to do some killer hacking, this could get you a clean, single deployable repeater placed anywhere within effectively 9 inches, 8 inches plus the length of the deployable repeater itself, anywhere within 9 inches of the midway line, which is 17 inches from the midway line, which is about 5 inches of projection into a standard enemy deployment zone. That's not bad for a single order that doesn't have to roll dice, although of course I'd also be very happy having the Puzzler reveal and do any number of other things. An Emerat ARO, for example, is very scary. And in this game, it would even use a surprise attack with the Acrolat Cannon, attempting to immobilize something. We've then got a pair of Garkis, and this is where the list does absolutely begin to run out of steam. As much as this is technically a 16 model list, this second combat group is thin on the ground. We are going Goblin mode with this. We've only got 4 actual orders in this combat group, and the full expectation is that the medtech will spend 1 order every round either doing something with one of its peripherals or repairing the Q-drone, and all other orders will be spent just gribbling the Garkis around, mostly using them to move 12 inches and detonate mines. Still, despite those concessions, it is a list with 16 combat models, and it's a list with 2 aspects, and both of them are very powerful. Ergo, it's a very solid list. I'm sure I could make some refinements if I wanted to, but this was the version of the list that Owen preferred, and so this is what he would be playing in our game today. Now, with Willpower 16, to no particular surprise, Combined Army wins the lieutenant role and elects to deploy second on the left side of the table. And in this scenario, that's bad news, because Hardlock is very second player favored. Now, intellectually, I kind of knew this. I didn't, before sitting down, really stop and count out how all of the scenario points could score. But it really cannot be emphasized enough how much this is actually a scenario of 3 buttons across the center that you need to press to win the game. Particularly with the list I was running, which was very defensively oriented, I think, frankly, there's a pretty reasonable chance that if I felt I had the remotest chance of surviving and doing so, I might almost hard go second. But in a competition scenario against a vanilla combined army that's just rolled willpower 16, probably not willing to do so. I know what's in Owen's list in this particular game because I've written it, but against Combined Army, you do have to respect the possibility that there could be a Speculo or a Rassiat, and you can't really just let a Speculo deploy for after you've done all of your deployments and have the luxury of first turn. So I lump that, I go first. It's going to be a challenging game as a result. Now, for my deployment, my two reserves would be the Vistral, but it won't have a huge effect. So just to run through everything, Veronin himself is squirreled away in this corner, safe as houses. Yes, potentially there could be some things that make a run up this road here, but I considered him to be fairly safe, since there was not a great deal otherwise that would be particularly interesting up that road, just a bunch of camouflage markers, etc., and I would have it well covered by crossfire from multiple different pieces. We've then got the first of two Vistrals on this rooftop, and it's linked with a tractor mule down here at ground level behind a barricade. The tractor mule is adding its mine to a little mess of camouflage markers that are all behind my deployment zone line on this sort of like balcony up here, which will be collectively one Strelok decoy, one mine from the tractor mule courier. I think it's actually the mine from the tractor mule courier is just at ground level behind this corner here peeking out, but then we've got a tank hunter and a Strelok decoy, all kind of in the same spot. Obviously, there is something amiss there. One of them's going to be the mine. What are the other two? Just offering a shell game to conserve things. The tank hunter in that position is in a reasonably good position. If I leave him where he is, he's got ARO shots out in either of these directions, but isn't particularly exposed to my opponent's deployment zone, which is really important against VCA because I have to respect the threat of the Caronted MSB 3 APHMG, and if I do move him, he can potentially move either out onto this balcony here or up these stairs onto this balcony and get some quite good shots. We've got our second Courier and Vistral team here. The Vistral is on the higher ground, the Courier is nestled in. You want your Couriers to be kind of further forward but in total cover if you can, because 24-inch range bands are actually quite forgiving and will give you accurate spec fire shot into a surprisingly large amount of the midfield, and they are your sources of baggage. There's going to be dynamos moving around who'll want to be reloading. The further forward your baggage is, the further forward your dynamos can be and still reload. In terms of dynamos, as mentioned, we have three. The first one is over behind this crate here. It will move quite a lot over the course of the first turn, but again, if it had never moved, part of what it's doing is defending Colonel Veronin, and the other two in their duo are here. The first one is just on ARO duty, just watching any close approaches here. The second, the paramedic, is further back as she is a mobile specialist and could be important. Finally, we've got the Ermandino prone behind this barricade here. Had I not deployed my Vistrals as reserve pieces, might be slightly closer to the Vistral, but his electronic is over here, which is in a fairly good position to recover this Vistral if need be. Finally, there are like a billion camouflage markers across the midfield, but in approximate order from top to bottom, we have a Strelok decoy, an EM mine, an antipode, a Strelok, a mine layer scout, another EM mine, a Strelok forward observer, a Strelok decoy, a scout EM mine, a scout mine layer, another scout EM mine, a Strelok decoy, a courier mine, and a courier mine. That's an awful lot of camouflage markers, and I enjoyed that quite a bit. Now, on the combined army side, the deployment is relatively simple. There's a bunch of random auto-generating things, Imatrons, Icadrons, R-drones, etc., all kind of in relatively safe positions back. The important and active pieces, we've got the Libertos and its mine ready to move up a flank over here. There is a little bit of an argument that they should have been pulled further back and dedicated to guarding the beacon in this particular case. But one of the few disadvantages of the side that Owen had chosen, it had a better protected beacon, but there wasn't much space around the beacon kind of in this circled area here that you might use kind of as a forward approach. And this was just a little bit more than 20 inches forward, which meant that the Libertos really would have to have been quite far back to be on guard duty for the beacon, and instead Owen dedicated 2 Datarazi and 2 Gaki to that, each of them behind these pieces of tall cover here and here. The Q drone is on large ARO duty, it's standing up tall, it's on hard ARO duty here, it's on this rooftop, it's got fairly good lines of sight. The Dr. Worm is actually on the second balcony level below it, and that's because Owen is cognizant of my spec fire threat. You would often choose to put Dr. Worm just quite close to the Q drone, but doing so would give me shots on 5s or even potentially on 8s that could hit both of them, and losing either of them would be a big deal. So he's just split those apart, knowing yes, it might take 2 orders Dr. Worm to recover the Q drone, but it's worth having that separation to avoid either guided or, in my case, more likely spec fire risk. Now, the anathematic is deployed standing behind these crates here, so another piece very well positioned to protect the beacon. And finally, the Carontid would deploy as the reserve drop down here, fairly safe in total cover, waiting for his active turn. Now, I'm going first, and this is a scenario that is not particularly easy to go first in, but I do have enough mobility and enough smoke, and because he knows I have counterintelligence, Owen declines to strip orders, so I potentially also have enough orders to make a scenario gambit play. So the goal here is to do some damage, but also to attempt and see if we can do a beacon theft, which is something that might get me some scenario points. So you don't actually get a lot of points for controlling the beacon in this particular scenario, but if I can grab it, it'll get me 1 point per round, which is enough to start putting me in an okay position, maybe giving me an edge when we get to the final round button grab frenzy. Oh, and I just realized I've forgotten to note where the Ranters are, the Sartroids rather. The Ranter is here on fairly long Overwatch duty using its Thunderbolt. That would actually matter. I would forget about that during the game as well. And then the Puzzler is here behind this building, ready to move out in either of these two directions. That will come up on the final round. So, I'm going first, and I've got a pretty comfortable order pool. And with that order pool, we're going to have a few lines of effort. First thing is just, look, take a ballistic skill attack, right? I've got a tank hunter right there. Let's see if I can't put the Q drone down because it's pinning back all of my mobile pieces, forcing me to lay smoke, etc. So the tank hunter stands up, takes the shot, and gets it down. I only land the one hit with the autocannon, which means it's not going to go all the way to dead, but it's a good face-to-face roll. Surprise attack is putting the Q drone on 5s along with my mimetism. I'm rolling for 10s. 3 dice 10s versus 3 dice 5s when I only need to succeed once because this is an autocannon round. Does the job. Excellent work, Tank Hunter. From here, we've got a few things to accomplish, and those things mostly are spew out a whole bunch of mines and make the run on the objective. So the Group 2 team of dynamos, which includes the paramedic, those are going to be the first pieces to move. This is the easiest button, I think, for me to get to, and I'm particularly interested in using my dynamos for that because they're in Group 2, and I'm going to need an awful lot of orders in Group 1 to get the button back that way. So they're going to zoom out this direction, they'll fire out tons of mines, we'll see those when we flick over to the next turn, and after 2 failed attempts, on the 3rd failed attempt, the Dynamo Paramedic presses this button, which means I can now grab the beacon on the Owen side of the table. They will also use like the last available order in their combat group to lay some smoke, and that smoke is going to go down here. Now, that's going to be very fortuitous. I placed that smoke there because there were a pair of Armies with chain rifles watching the objective. What it's also going to mean is that the anathematic is not going to do anything at all in ARO this turn. That wasn't intentional, but it would end up being very important. I did try and lay another smoke grenade as well, but it wouldn't be able to deal with the Ranter. I'm going to have to just face tank that. I didn't have enough orders otherwise. Because of all of the button presses it took the dynamos to achieve their objective, I'm going to just have to wear it because this other dynamo is now going on that run, and it's going to come all the way up and around here, all the way up and around here, and make a go for the objective. Now, it's very fast. It's not 8.6, but it is 8.4. And ultimately, I'm making this run in kind of the full knowledge that it's probably a one-way trip. I do have some spare movement because it's 8.4. I'm kind of willing to spend secondary short skills to do productive things. And some of those productive things, it's going to lay out some additional mines. It's also going to try and get smoke down here, but it's not going to succeed. And so that means that, yep, cool. There's a Ranter there. It's got a Thunderbolt. We're going to have to just wear that. It's single burst. But tragically, as I cross this gap, yep, the Ranter hits and deals a wound, which means I go Dogged. Dogged is a really good skill, however, so we're going to carry on with the run. We're going to come around here, we're going to grab the beacon and get out a little bit, and then we're going to get straight back across this gap, coming in underneath these crates here. We will get basically around to about there before the Ranter will hit us a second time and put the dynamo down. It's very likely I would have been very well served by having the paramedic dynamo not fail as many rolls to press the button as it did, but them's the breaks, and I have gotten the beacon all the way down to here. There is a scout very, very close by. It's a scout EM mine layer, and it's just going to pick up the button and make a run all the way down here. It will get as far as there's some safe space down here behind this building, behind a crate. It will get as far as there in this particular turn, and that's most of what I'm able to accomplish. And as far as it goes, that's a pretty good first turn in this scenario, particularly with this list. I'm able to use, I think, a coordinated order to get the tank hunter in a position of safety. I don't want it standing up. But if we look at this table state, I've gotten the beacon all the way back to my half of the table, that's a really big deal. Not as big a deal as it would be in previous versions of this scenario, back when this was called Capture and Protect, but still pretty valuable. And you can see just here the number of mines that have been seeded throughout the midfield. The mines are layered in a considerable amount of depth, basically all the way through this particular space here, making an approach here. It's going to take some effort, particularly given how much aero and overwatch I have. Owen can't safely impetuous with any of his pieces early, with the sole exception of this Gaki here, which is able to get out from underneath my guns just barely. It creeps around here, it dodges this mine, and it carries on, and it's going to be using its irregular order during its turn to move, dodge, and defang some further mines, ending up in this position here. That's what the Gakis are there for. Their primary job is to defang mines, and this one just took care of 2 of them without dying, which is really good. The bulk of the rest of the effort in this particular turn is going to be spent. Firstly, Dr. Worm will use all remaining orders in his combat group to crawl up here, recover this, and then get back, and the Carontid will spool up and do some damage. It does take, I think, 2 orders for Tartary to get some smoke down. The Carontid moves around this direction and then up here and engages this Vistral, and after a fairly fierce gunfight, the Carontid does take 1 wound, but he puts the Vistral to unconscious. That takes quite a lot of the available time, however. Owen's able to do a little bit of pushing forward with a few pieces, but even with smoke shooting with a ballistic skill 14 armor-piercing HMG round, putting down linked Vistrals takes a really long time, and it just takes a bunch of Owen's turn. He puts that Vistral down, he makes a little bit of forward progress, and that's the bulk of what he's able to do. It's not, however, the end of the world, because, as you'll recall, this is a very second player-centric scenario. And so while Owen wants to keep his eye out for an opportunity to come after and at least delete the piece that is holding this beacon for a turn, just to prevent me from scoring a point, there are other late game opportunities that he has, particularly with regards to pressing buttons, because those are the major point scores in this mission. So passing into my second turn, we can see we're basically in kind of a reset game state. Yes, I've got the beacon, and yes, that's ticking up points, and I've got 1 button pressed, but I need to do some damage now, because if we just have status quo back and forth where I recover my TR bots and he recovers his, he's going to reach a point in the end game where a willpower 16 specialist emerges and presses a whole bunch of buttons. So getting Owen down in terms of orders and doing some damage is the order of the day, and we're going to do our best to accomplish that. And so we do at least have a fairly large order pool. We're down just the 1 Vistral. It's the Vistral in Combat Group 1, and so we are going to use, as before, our camouflage and our mines and our smoke to just set up our attacks and kill as many things as we possibly can. The first play of the round is the Tank Hunter again. Now, if it just stands up, it will be seen by both the Ranter that has moved forward, it moved forward as part of Dr. Worm's actions, and the Q-Drone. I don't want to fight both of those at the same time, but if I crawl down the stairway, I will be exposed just to the Q-Drone. I take that fight, I'm in cover, he's in cover, I'm a Tank Hunter autocannon, and this time I roll a pair of 10s, cause the Q-Drone to take 8 saves, and Q-Drones don't like that, so it is permanently dead now. That's excellent. I'm then able to stand up, take a fight against the Ranter. This is a little bit of a tricky one. It is Mimetism 6, but it's just firing a Thunderbolt, and again, it misses, I get the hit, I put it down, and then I'm able to lean out and take a fight against this Datarazi as well. This Datarazi, it took an impetuous movement, it's a little bit ill-advisedly positioned, it's going to go down as well. Excellent, we're on a good spot. Now, we also want to deal with the Gaki that swam its way into the midfield. We'll use the Dynamos for that. We've got a linked Ballistic Skill 12 boarding shotgun. Now this does take a couple of orders, but scooting around the corner and back and taking shots into this Gaki does eventually produce a kill. Excellent, that's another piece down. The last thing that I really want to deal with, I want to get as many kills as I can. I'm going to lay out some more mines, stuff like that. But the kill that I really want to get is against the Carontid. That is a tricky fight, but it is already wounded, and most of the orders that I've spent all of 3 orders in my first combat group. I'm going to spend the remaining orders in combat group 2 using the Omandino to recover the Vistral, but otherwise it's been Dynamos laying smoke and doing most of the work, so we've actually got a fair few orders in combat group 1. That's really good because there's an unlinked courier here now that's going to spend 2 orders moving forward and laying mines, and then it's going to spec fire, spec fire, spec fire, and spec fire, and it turns out that's about enough shots to put 2 wounds on this Carontid, and given the Carontid is wounded already, down it goes, it's dead, and that's a really big deal. Now, yes, it absolutely took all of those orders. Firstly, I had to move forward into good range. I might actually have been in good range already, but I didn't want to chance it. In retrospect, I think if I'd eyeballed this a bit more carefully, I should probably have taken one shot first to check range and then relocated if I need to. I underestimated 24 inches, I think, in this particular case. But moving forward and laying mines was fine. And with something like 6 orders in the tank if I'd needed it to make that kill, since I had 9 to start the turn with and the tank hunter used 3, in good range with me hitting on 8s and the Carontid dodging on 7s, wow, that's a surprisingly good face-to-face roll. And yep, sure enough, down goes the 70-point elite heavy infantry and the biggest gunfighter Owen had to contest my primary firepower pieces. Now, that's an excellent second turn. If that had been my first turn, that would have been absolutely cracking, but I'm going to need the scenario points. I'm happy with the first turn as it was. But the thing about a double aspect list is that it's a double aspect list. And so this would be the turn when the anathematic would finally reveal. It would reveal itself behind these crates here, and it would move forward and start making some plays. Owen was still not going to have a free lunch here, though, because there were still mines in the midfield. There were still EM mines. Some of them he knew, for example. He knows that this camouflage marker is an EM mine, and there are not an unlimited number of Garkis remaining to clear those out. But there is a Sartroid puzzler, and so it just makes the ultimate sacrifice. We can see that there is a mine here, and a mine here, and so the Sartroid is going to appear, move 8 inches around to there. It's actually going to fire its Acolyte Cannon in surprise attack against the Vistral over here, which would have been excellent if it had gone off. Puzzlers have got a -6 surprise attack modifier, so it's a really surprisingly solid. In this case, it missed and it blew up all of those mines and died, but that's kind of the important thing, right? It blew up 3 different mines, which cleared a path. Now, even with that relative efficiency from Combat Group 2, there's ultimately a limit to what the anathematic can accomplish this turn, because I've killed a bunch of the things in Combat Group 1, but it is going to do the best with what it's got. Most of its turn, this turn is going to be spent moving in this direction. It will get discovered by a Vistral along the way, but it will get clear as part of that. It will take some incidental gunfights, and the main thing it will be able to do is to kill one of the dynamos down here. Other fights are just a little bit challenging for it right now. It does attempt some, but it really can't expose itself to aggressive Overwatch fire, and the Vistrals in particular are just far enough back to be outside of 16 inches unless it breaks cover, and even an anathematic is not willing to do this. So it gets that kill, it recamouflages, and it sets itself up for the final round. Otherwise, in this combat group, the Libertos is going to make the run around here, but it will really not get terribly far before it's forced to stop and just position itself as kind of an annoying little gremlin. As we head into my final turn, I'm feeling pretty comfortable about this. I'm really not down that many troops. I've lost 2 dynamos, and that's it at this particular point. I've held the beacon for multiple turns, and I'll probably hold it for this next point, this next turn as well. That sounds like it's really good. It does sound like it's really good. I didn't actually stop and really think about the beat buttons or scenario here. I didn't do a specific count, and this was a mistake. And as mistakes go, despite the attrition I'd inflicted on Owen's combined army, it would offer him a small out. Now, I did know absolutely this is a button pressing scenario, and so I resolved to set about pressing buttons in this particular turn. If I could, I would absolutely kill the anathematic because that would seal the game, but I judge it to be a very difficult model to attack. I think it's actually likely I should have pushed against it more aggressively, and we'll kind of see how that plays out. So, what do I accomplish this turn? Well, we use remaining coordinated orders to do things like stand up the tank hunter just to be an ARO piece and get this scout even further back into safety. Cool, I will have the beacon for the remainder of the game. We then have the Strelok with its K9 antipode move up, come up and around onto this high ground, take, I think, 2 orders to press this button, and then move out and around with the Strelok to see, using rather both the Strelok and the K9, to see the anathematic. Now, at this point, I will admit I was discombobulated slightly because I was using my Tariq Mansouri model as the only thing that was the right size to represent the Strelok, or the K9 rather, and when I revealed it, Owen made a little bit of a comment about how Tariq was obviously just the Strelok's boyfriend who she keeps on a leash, and at that point I doubled over for 5 minutes. And by the time I'd composed myself, I'd quite forgotten what I was meant to be doing, but we did nevertheless carry on, and those two were able to discover the anathematic. Now, at that point, that's not a fight that either of them particularly wanted to take, but with him in the open, that limited his options for next turn. I laid some more mines, I used this Strelok Forward Observer to come around and press this button here, and that meant I had all 3 buttons under my control. That's pretty sound. Okay, cool. I've got, at this point, kind of almost every single scenario point I might be able to score. It's just what Owen can take back from me. But that almost is going to be important. With this Strelok, this movement forward to get both of them into line of sight, this was a mistake. What I should have done is had the Strelok, her stealth, stay prone back in this corner here, because this is Owen's HVT. Instead, she stood to get the extra discover roll, but she should have been securing the HVT. The K9 could easily have moved to the same position. If it had failed the discover roll, it could even have moved out and censored before disconnecting. The Strelok not securing the HVT is going to end up being quite important. This is because of math, which I declined to do. Now, what I did do in all of my remaining orders is just fire up the old Specfire again now that the anathematic was discovered, and with only a few orders to Specfire, I succeeded in putting 2 wounds on the anathematic. For those following along at home, that is 4 wounds to the 2 most expensive units in the combined army using just 14-point Specfire goblins. But otherwise, with the exception of the Ermandino Impetuousing coming around and then discovering and dealing with this Liberto, that would be all that I could accomplish. Now, prima facie, that's not a bad condition to go into the final round in this scenario. As we roll into the final combined army turn, the anathematic is wounded, the anathematic is discovered, every single button is under my control, and I have held the beacon for every single turn, and I will hold it for this turn as well. However, I've not done my classified, and Owen has done his. He has telemetried this dynamo. My own classified was to engineer the HVT, which was never in a million years going to happen, and I'm not securing the HVT or the treasure. And in terms of how scoring in this scenario works, you get 1 point for each turn you're holding the beacon, 1 point at the end of the game if your beacon is not captured, 1 point per antenna, and 2 points if you have more antennas than your opponent. And that means there is a significant swing that Owen can leverage that is enough to get him to a tie in only a small number of orders. Now, he does not have many orders. He's, I believe, functionally out of command tokens, and he's got 6 or so to spend on the anathematic. We've got 1 regular order, 1 lieutenant order, and then a regular in combat group 2, which is going to be spent on Dr. Worm moving up and around here and taking a shot into the Strelok, which will miss. Okay, cool, did his best. The rest is on the anathematic, who is wounded, but theoretically capable of at least bringing the game to a draw. The first thing he's going to do is move around here, then around again, press the button. Once he's gotten some smoke cover from, there is a Datarazi over here. Yep, so sorry, the first thing of the turn, before Dr. Worm even, is the Datarazi, who is going to Impetuous. The Datarazi will Impetuous around to here. It will take more Overwatch than God and get blown absolutely to hell, but it will roll an 11 to land smoke down there, which gives the Anathematic the cover that it needs. It moves out and around and then back. On the way back, it will press this button. Pressing this button switches it over to Owen's side. From here, the anathematic has all of like 4 orders to spend. By the way, during this movement, the Strelok and the Antipode are taking shots, but they are at terrible range, and this is a Mimetism 6 target, and nothing happens. Okay, so what else do we have to do with the anathematic? We've got to get it across this gap over to this button. To do that, we are going to recamouflage while in the smoke, move out, move again, crossing the gap as the discover rolls fail, and then getting around to the beacon on the very last, around to the button rather, on the very last order of the round. The anathematic, actually I think probably what he has to do to make the order of movement efficient, sorry, I tell a lie, he actually has to break cover, takes a gunfight with the Strelok, puts her down, that clears line of sight, so he's able to camouflage here, cross the gap, actually gets discovered but doesn't matter, and on the very last order of the game, moves around to this button, has to roll a willpower 16, but willpower 16 is really, really good, does so, and flips this button. And what that means is at the end of this round, I've got 3 points for the beacons that I have controlled across all 3 rounds, 1 point for having my beacon not controlled, and 1 point for the button that I've pressed. Owen's got 1 point for each of the 2 buttons he's pressed, 2 points for pressing more buttons, and 1 point for doing his classified. Which means that despite everything, despite the really solid attritional lead that I've taken, the score is 5-all. Now, in retrospect, as discussed, there are actually a bunch of things I could have done to have stopped that. The first is I could have pushed harder and just washed a whole bunch of orders spec firing the anathematic. Like, as soon as the anathematic was discovered, I could have stopped everything else I was doing and just spec fired it until it was dead. Would that have been a high variance play? Yes, it might not have worked, and I'd felt pretty silly if it did. but it is something to consider. The better play, as mentioned, was to keep this Strelok prone over here in a position where it was securing the HVT. That does actually win me the game. Yes, it wins me the game 6-5, but a 6-point win is absolutely fine in any event situation. That's still a major. And all I needed for that to succeed was just to not move her forward into the open and thought about what it was that I was accomplishing. That's the kind of thing that comes with practice, right? I've played Hardlock before, but only once or twice, and always just playing it from the second side. And in every Hardlock game I think I've played so far, no one ever got the beacon at any point early. This was therefore a situation that was a little bit novel for me, which is good. You do the practice to get that kind of thing, but it really did showcase, hey, you got to do a bunch of work to win this scenario as first player. It's really hard. Now, despite that, and despite what were obviously some play mistakes, particularly in that challenging final turn, pretty happy with how Tartary Army Corps played. Despite their nerfs, Combined Army are still a very good faction. They were played well this game. The list I think is sound. Of course I think that. I wrote it. And being able to leverage a whole bunch of different strengths, fight asymmetrically, is very satisfying to do so and really enjoying it. What I did take away from this, though, is that there's a pretty reasonable chance I could trade some of what's in this list out, except the Vistrals kind of not being linked, for example. And there definitely is a shift I could make into Vanilla Ariadna that gets me a less focused list, but a bunch of things that are still really good. And one of the things that would be really good to have in this particular scenario, if I'm going first, is a piece like Van Zandt, especially, which gives me a real gut punch attack into the deployment zone on the first turn, which is something that this list otherwise really only does using dynamos. And yes, dynamos are kind of fine at that, but I am reluctant to use them that way. And being able to really carve a chunk out of your opponent on the first turn is one of the things that can set you up for a win on the buttons, even going first in this scenario, just through sheer attrition. Still, very happy with how attack played, happy with the conversions that I've been doing. I got to put all of my recently converted Silhouette 4 remotes on the table, along with all of my bikes, etc. So the aesthetic of the army I'm very pleased with, although if I was going to play this exact list, I would need to buy some more camouflage markers. Still, as far as test games go for a future event go, this definitely doesn't eliminate TAC from contention. Pretty happy with how they played, and I think definitely a game that validates some of the strengths that I was really happy with during the Tartary Army Corps faction focus. So that wraps up this game. I'm absolutely not going to put all of my testing games for CanCon on this channel. Firstly, a man must keep some secrets, and secondly, there's going to be a whole bunch of them, and we don't do entirely battle reports. There's plenty of other topics that we cover as well. Still, as far as this battle report goes, hope that you've enjoyed it. If you did and you'd like to support the channel, you can do so either by becoming a channel member on YouTube, a channel supporter on Buy Me a Coffee, the link for which is in the video description below. We cover Infinity and other games, things like Conquest, Song of Ice and Fire, with videos covering Infinity once per week and other games slightly less regularly, and I take input and suggestions and votes from channel members and supporters on what topics to cover. So I hope very much you've enjoyed this. This is our Infinity video for the week, and we'll be back next week with more Infinity content, and so I will see you next time.